Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope you guys are doing very well. You guys all voted for the animal of the month and it was a really close call, but eventually we landed on the next painting being a fox with autumn foliage. And for this video I want to focus on how to choose reference photos and how to mash them up to make a whole new pose out of it. As you can see here, my preferred image search engine that I love to use looking for reference photos is Pinterest. But feel free to use any image source that you like, especially when we're talking about mashing up different reference photos. But what exactly do I mean when I say mashing up reference photos? Well, when you use things like Pinterest or any other person's work as a reference, so a photo of the animal in question is going to be a photograph by someone else, and when you're doing studies of the animal, trying to understand their anatomy, etc., it doesn't have to be transformative because, you know, you're just using it as a tool to teach yourself and you're not trying to monetize it in any way. But like for instance with me, I'm trying to make a postcard to sell and to convey as my own work. I do like to mash different things together and transform it in such a way that it becomes something entirely new, and I'm going to show you guys how I do that. So I'm just scrolling Pinterest, trying to get some inspiration, and then I see this photo here and I'm like, I can definitely use that. I can do something else with his tail, and I can use a different reference photo for the face to give him a different expression. I can make him a different species, I can make him floofier, so I just continue looking for other reference photos that I can use. And eventually I find this face and I'm like, yep, that's the one we'll use. I just stay on Pinterest for a little bit longer looking for images that I like, and then we're ready to go to the next step, which is combining these references into our sketch. So as usual, I open Photoshop, make my canvas, and start arranging my reference photos that I want to use around the place that I'm going to start drawing. I'm also adding in some photos of autumn foliage that I might want to use. I'm not quite sure what exactly I want to do with the plants around it. I saw some ferns that I thought were really interesting. I always prefer to do the animal first and then see what the pose is like and then add in the plants, because that way it can feel more organic and flowing with the rest of the image. The first thing I'm going to do is translate all these photographs into basic shapes. I'm going to choose a nice little vibrant color so I can draw over these images and see what I'm doing. I always start with establishing the line of movement. So with this little fox, it's this very obvious reverse C shape. Also look at the direction of the hips and shoulders. And then I start looking at the more geometric shapes that I see in the photo, such as all these triangles that I'm starting to find. I like drawing over the reference photos in Photoshop, but you can also do this in your mind's eye. Now we're not going to be using all of this information because we're going to be combining certain photos together. So let's go over to the face that we're going to use, and in this face I can see very obvious diamond shapes, like the face is a collection of different diamonds combined with the triangular ears. Also see downward pointing triangles under the eyes, and the nose is a rectangle, etc, etc. You can just keep translating into shapes as far as you find necessary. Keeping those shapes in mind, I'm just going to start drawing the animal. You're going to have to use a lot of mental gymnastics to figure out these shapes while combining them, so I'm using a thicker brush just so I can block out the shapes a little bit more rough than I usually would. Don't think about the details of the face or the fur or anything at this point right now, it's just about the composition, the design, etc. I did draw in his face a little bit just so he looked a little bit friendlier than he was. And here I am using the digital tools to my advantage again and selecting bits and turning them around, reshaping them so that the proportions are more correct. If you feel yourself struggling with certain parts of the body, go back to the reference photos and draw in some more shapes. I am struggling a bit here with the hips, so I draw over the hips in the photo and I realized that the shapes are a bit too short, so I elongate it. Another way to translate the shapes in your reference photos is to look at the negative space, just as with the front paws here. I kind of felt that space was feeling a little bit empty, so I added a paw. I'm sure the anatomy isn't entirely correct, but I'll look at that later when I'm rendering the rest of the sketch. Being 100% anatomically correct isn't exactly my goal here. I would be willing to sacrifice some of that accuracy to make room for some personality and stylization. I do want the pose to be balanced and make sense in the end, so one of the best tricks you can do for that is to mirror your image. Now in Photoshop you can just flip canvas horizontally. If you're drawing on a piece of paper, you can hold it up to a mirror or flip the paper backwards and hold it up against a window, and you will immediately see major proportional issues, if there are any. It'll make the painting process go so much more smoothly if you get those errors dealt with while still in the sketching phase. It's a lot harder to deal with when you're already 80% done with your painting. Believe me, I've been there. Right now I'm struggling with the tilted paw a bit, so I went in and looked for a new reference photo that would help me with what I'm trying to draw. And same goes for the bottom paws. I realize I already have one on my canvas that'll work really well for the back paws. Sometimes I feel like my whole sketching process is more like sculpting, because I first start up with a mess that doesn't make sense and then I just keep rendering and rendering until it does make sense. And I grab new reference photos whenever I need it. I guess that's just how my brain works. Of course, feel free to do it in a more structured way. I am now entering the phase where I need to think about the background, so I look up some photos of some logs to see how they actually look like in nature. I have collected some reference photos of leaves that I want to use and of the ferns. The challenge is going to be not make it too busy. I still wasn't entirely happy with that back paw, so on Pinterest I found a nice study sheet someone made of different angles of canine paws, but in the end I ended up making a picture of my own dog's foot to use, and that ended up helping me a bit more. Whoever ended up counting how many references I used in this picture will get a prize. And here we are to the final step of the sketching process. I am using the reference photos to choose the colors. Sometimes I use the eyedropper tool for this, sometimes I just try to eyeball it. Again, my goal is to make these creative decisions before I start painting, so the painting process goes swimmingly. Now all that hard work I want to copy exactly onto my canvas, so I print it out and use my transfer method as usual. For the line work, even though these are simplified shapes, I do turn to my reference photos to look at where the fur is smooth, where it sticks out a bit, where it creates like a floofy texture, and I'm doing this for the foliage as well. I roughly block in the colors that I chose as the color palette. Once that's all in, I return back to my reference photos so that I can look at the texture of the fur and where the shadows appear. There's a lot of different color hues and saturation within the fur. It's not just orange, but there's like patches of darker brown, brighter orange, etc., like you can see here in this breakdown. And I will use all that information while filling in the colors. Every time I create a new artwork, I try to reflect on how my last one went and what I thought I could do better. And when I created the deer the last time, I thought that I added too much detail that I had to end up getting rid of later on. So I'm challenging myself not to add too much detail in spots where it's not necessary. This also makes it a lot easier to merge all the references together seamlessly. I'm not gonna lie, I was really struggling and wanted to give up a few times while painting this. Sometimes it is better to start on a project all over again, but making what you have work is also a very valuable learning experience. And to make matters worse, I ended up spilling red paint all over my painting. I don't know if you can see it here, a little bit in the borders, but I managed to salvage the whole thing, but whew, I stayed calm and I fixed it, and now it's done. At least I decided that I'm just gonna stop painting here and make some minor adjustments in Photoshop, like rearrange the leaves a little bit and resize them, but most of all, it's done. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys learned something. I would like to personally thank all my patrons: Suzanne, Lois, Patrick, Linda, Renee, Susanne, Natalie, Vera, Chloe, Evelyn, Katie, and Patty. Bye!